Terraria's success has grown to a point where it's competing on the top spots of gaming. Terraria has not just become a classic of the genre, but also one of the most played and most sold video games ever to exist on this planet. Terraria is known for its unique take on both the platforming and the sandbox genre, but much lesser known for everything behind the curtain. Ever wondered what's the NPC's backstory? What exactly is the lore of the biomes and its bosses, and why is the world empty until you, the sole survivor, arrives? This is the story of Terraria. The universe of Terraria has countless worlds in it, and in the blind spot of the universe there exists a planet of extraordinary potential. The world of Terraria as we know it. The world of Terraria is a living being, which sounds odd, but in fact it is. It senses everything that happens, knows about every single step we do, and carefully watches the balance. Imagine it as a neural network where every biome and block is connected to the world's mind. And the world's first and most important goal is balance. Balance at any cost. Wildlife and nature in the eyes of the world are deemed unnecessary, expendable. And this is where things take a strange and dark turn. Terraria's worlds have a rich history. Although your story begins in a peaceful forest, many events happen before we enter the world, some of which resulted in terrible consequences. The world, however, developed mechanisms to protect itself to maintain some sort of balance. Once we explored the peaceful world for a while, walking across grass, sand and snow, we may stumble upon some of those mechanisms. Those mechanisms are brutal and unforgiving, known as the corruption, the crimson and the Hallow, all of which share a fairly subjective sense of balance. The corruption is a cancer caused by the sins of those living in the world of Terraria. It will spread relentlessly across each world and consumes everything it touches, leaving soulless creatures with the sole purpose of punishment and hate. Its definition of balance is to overtake and destroy every life in its way. If there isn't any life, the balance can't be disturbed, right? It's a fairly evil perception of balance and highly subjective for obvious reasons. It has plenty of tools in order to achieve its goal. One of them is the Eater of Worlds, whose name already gives us an idea he's no one to mess around with. And he does exactly what the name implies. He is snacking on corrupted chunks of the world similar to earthworms, although much more destructive in its nature. And beside the Eater of Worlds, the corruption will create more terrible creatures that exist for the sole reason to cause pain and punishment for those who still live. But there's more evil balance at work. The Crimson is no different in its core. The Crimson is a single living being connected directly to the world and solely focused on the so-called balance of the world at all cost. Thousands of worlds have been absorbed by this being. Countless of misguided people have made the mistake to let the Crimson grow, which ultimately consumed their bodies to become one with the Crimson to follow their order blindly. To explain this in different words, imagine corporate greed which only purpose is to balance their own spreadsheets, consuming the soul and free will of their worker in order to min-max its own reach. All led by the brain of Cthulhu, the hive mind pulling the strings behind the curtain, turning living beings into zombie-like shells, raising the unsettling question if zombies were actually created by the hive mind, the brain of Cthulhu, which would make a simple kind of sense as its goal is to turn living beings exactly into this. A soulless worker trying to consume those that live. The Hallow, on the other hand, is an entire different nature. But before we dive into the madness of the Hallow, we need to take a look and understand what the Wall of Flash is. The Wall of Flash marks the end of pre-hard mode. The Wall of Flash is the guardian of the world, essentially a seal that locks away ancient spirits that we know as some of the strongest bosses in the game. For the Hallow, the Wall of Flash is important. If the Wall of Flash would be defeated, the Hallow would rise in order to find a new guardian and core of the world and cleanse everything else while doing so, which it does. Once we enter hard mode, the Hallow will generate and start to spread, reflecting these events in-game. The Hallow is an overcompensation of purity, taken to a whole different and extreme level. Don't get fooled by all those rainbows and sparkles, as it's not separating between friends and foes at all. Literally everything that isn't Hallow is threatened as an infection, including us, the player. It's like that one friend who is so scared of bacteria they don't just use hand sanitizer, they use UV sterilizer, a steam cleaner, and then burn the whole room down just to make sure. The Queen Slime is just one of its tools to achieve its goals. Another tool, a literal goddess, is the infamous Empress of Light, one of the strongest beings in the world of Terraria, and even stronger if you summon her at daytime. Needless to say, the Hallow is the strongest force in the world of Terraria. Everything else that may appear stronger is not from this world. And despite all those mechanisms to protect the cycle and balance of the world, one being has harmed this order more than anyone else, known as Cthulu. Cthulhu's only purpose is to rain destruction and destroy the very fabric of the world. Or in short, he really is pissed for seemingly no reason. Being evil is simply his thing. Not that it matters, but if you're familiar with the Elder Scrolls lore, he shares some attributes of Jiggerluck, the strongest being ever to exist. His goal is order, full order, devotion, enslavement, and punishment for those who don't follow their order, much like Cthulhu, or as we know him, the Moon Lord. Most people at this point also know the Terraria universe borrows heavily from the cosmic horror stories, written by no one less as the king of cosmic horror stories himself, H.P. Lovecraft. In these stories of H.P. Lovecraft, entities like Cthulhu are described as an ancient, incomprehensible being that exists far beyond human understanding. Terraria reflects this idea through bosses like the Wall of Flesh or the Moonlord. While you might think the Moonlord is simply a Terraria name for the last boss as of now, it's not exactly right. The Moonlord is Cthulhu. This becomes transparent with bosses like the Eye and the Brain of Cthulhu, where he's directly mentioned in the name. When Relogic released the lore around the 1.3.5 update, they also made official that it is indeed Cthulhu. We could argue the Moonlord is rather an interpretation of how Terraria's inhabitants or NPCs may look at the stranger, godlike being coming from the universe. The name Moonlord is a pretty good name for this. However, H.P. Lovecraft never gave Cthulhu the alternative name of the Moonlord. This name is Relogic's take. Cthulhu once was an almost unstoppable force no one stood a chance against while he was invading countless worlds in space, and the world of Terraria. Countless beings tried to tackle him, but however no one succeeded. No one? Well, no one apart from the Dryad. Or let's say, the Dryad sisters. Many of them used to live on this world to maintain nature's balance, but sacrificed themselves in a brutal fight in order to weaken what they called the Moonlord. The fight against the Moonlord was lost, but the Dryads managed to rip off body parts. And even if they are just organs of Cthulhu, they are still powerful enough to give us a tough boss fight, known as the Eye and the Brain of Cthulhu. And even beyond that, these organs have been used to create even more powerful bosses we talk about later. And with such force and raw power, all Dryads died while attempting to weaken Cthulhu. All beside one single Dryad that will eventually become part of your base. It's not just pretty sad, but the Dryad is also a pretty big deal when you think about it. She must have walked the lands of Terraria alone for centuries in nothing but solitude. She has looked evil in the eye, quite literally, and compared to the angler or tax collector, she actually attempted to save this world, more or less successfully. When nobody was there for the world, she tried her best to take care of nature's balance all alone. So if in the future the Dryad asks you to clean the world, keep that in mind. She knows best. In any way, the Moon Lord, despite being the hateful creature he is, was worshipped as a god by some people. And even if the Moon Lord was weakened by the Dryads, these lunatics wanted to revive their lord and still worship him as their god. Much later, they will eventually revive him, but don't manage to resurrect him in its former glory. This event is tied to the lunar events in-game. You might wonder what the 4 pillars actually are. These pillars are essentially a seal, a last resort created by the Dryads to banish the Moon Lord since they couldn't manage to kill him entirely. What I think is interesting is that we fight a heavily weakened form of Cthulhu. Half of him is missing from the Dryads' effort, so it's like fighting a legendary warrior long after his prime. Still dangerous, but nowhere near the unstoppable force he once was. And despite all that, he is still able to mark the end of a journey as the last boss of Terraria. It would be interesting to fight him in his full form in the very last and final future update, DM. Now, we already mentioned the Lunatics. These heretics caused much more trouble than you might think. They cursed the old capital, a once thriving and huge city, and turned it into what we know as the dungeon. Just to enslave every single soul inside of it and sacrifice them to the Moon Lord. The old man, once a citizen of Terraria, now is the corrupted overseer of the dungeon to prevent anyone from disturbing the Lunatics' plan and from stealing all the hidden treasure. Shortly before you, the hero of Terraria, arrived, the Lunatic cult even captured the mechanic and kept her in the dungeon, where she was forced to build insane creations based on the organs of Cthulhu. We all know them as the mechanical Triforce, like the Twins, Skeleton Prime and the Destroyer. Now this knowledge makes the whole lore around the mechanic much more interesting. Now, considering she's able to create such bosses on her own, I feel like selling us just a couple of Ys and tools is a bit below her true capabilities, isn't it? However, many people don't know that she will indeed construct something for us. The cyborg NPC is built with a team effort from both the steampunker and the mechanic and supposed to help with engineering and rocket science. However, there is a catch. Despite the lore stating he was built by them, they aren't actually an in-game requirement. All it takes is a dead jungle plant and a free room in layout mode, a classic case of lore versus gameplay mechanics. But still, the world we play on has a rich history full of events, mostly caused by Cthulhu, or the Moon Lord. A world that is left shattered and wounded by cosmic horror is now ours to explore, destroy or restore. These are the old tales of Terraria, the state of the world as of now, and this is where you start your adventure, ages and years after all those events. There's so many interesting pieces of lore written by the community or official comics, which I highly recommend. Mods like Calamity even build their own lore with brilliant ideas and takes on the setting. Who knows, maybe someone is going to tell the story of Calamity as well. As for vanilla Terraria, a lot of things are still in the dark and never explained fully. Or to quote Lovecraft directly, never explain anything. And this is a good thing, considering Terraria is a sandbox game where we are able to build our own lore, block by block. But there's one NPC who knows it all. His brother once got sucked in by the Slime King, and this is all we know about the mysterious guide. He gives us advice about any item is there before we are, and even knows about the strongest weapons and how to craft them. Who the f